The forest was quiet, its towering trees standing like ancient guardians, their leaves whispering secrets to the wind. Sunlight filtered through the thick canopy and fractured beams, painting dappled patterns on the soft earth. Birds chirped occasionally, fluttering from branch to branch, and somewhere in the distance, a squirrel rustled through the underbrush. But beneath this serene beauty was a corner of the woods that held a different kind of silence, one not of peace, but of abandonment. Tied to a crooked, gnarled tree with a frayed old rope was a small puppy, no more than a few months old. His fur, once likely golden and soft, was now matted and dirty, tangled with leaves and dried mud. His ribs showed through his thin sides, his legs trembling beneath him. Flies buzzed near his ears, and though he tried to shoo them with what little energy he had, his movements were weak and sluggish. The puppy's eyes were perhaps the most heartbreaking of all. Big and round, they were filled not just with fear but with confusion. They kept scanning the path leading back to the road, waiting, watching, hoping. He didn't understand. One moment, he had been curled up on the back seat of a car, wagging, his tiny tail at the woman who had smiled at him just days earlier. She had called him Buddy, scratched behind his ears, and fed him scraps from her lunch. He remembered how she'd whispered to him, "We'll find a place for you, sweet boy." And then they'd driven off into the trees, the hum of the car lulling him into a half-sleep. Then the car had stopped. The woman had lifted him gently from the back seat. She hadn't looked him in the eyes. Her hands had trembled slightly as she tied the rope around his neck and secured it to the tree. "I'm sorry," she had whispered. Her voice had cracked. I just can't." Then she was gone. The engine roared back to life, the sound fading into the distance. He had watched the road for hours, expecting her to return, certain it was some sort of mistake. Maybe she forgot something. Maybe she was coming back with help. But the sun had moved high overhead, and now it began its slow descent. Day turned to dusk, and dusk would soon give way to darkness. Still, he waited. His stomach growled. It was a sharp, hollow pain that twisted in his belly. There was a rusted tin bowl nearby with a small amount of water, already tainted with dirt and leaves. No food, just the damp earth and fading hope. Occasionally he let out a soft whimper. Not loud, not desperate, just a faint, broken sound, like he was afraid even his cries would be lost in the vastness of the forest. He lowered, his head onto his paws, ears twitching at every crack of twigs or rustle of leaves, wondering if it was her, but it never was. The shadows grew longer. The forest grew colder. As night crept in, the forest transformed. The gentle chirping of birds gave way to the haunting calls of owls. The wind picked up, carrying with it a chill that cut through the little puppy's thin fur. He shivered, curling tighter into himself, trying to make his small body disappear into the roots of the tree. He dreamed in flickering half-sleep of warm hands, of cozy blankets, of a name softly spoken. Buddy. He jerked awake to the sound of something moving. His ears perked up, tail giving a weak twitch. Eyes scanned the darkness. Was it her? Was it someone? But no. It was just a raccoon scurrying by, uninterested in the trembling ball of fur tied to a tree. Tears welled in the puppy's eyes, real glistening tears that slipped down his muzzle and darkened the already matted fur beneath his eyes. He didn't understand why he was here, why the warmth was gone, why the love had vanished. He didn't know what he had done to deserve this punishment. The hours passed slowly. The stars overhead blinked through the branches like distant, indifferent eyes. Crickets sang their nightly songs, and still the puppy lay there motionless, defeated. But somewhere deep inside him, beneath the ache and fear, was a small flicker of something that refused to die. Hope. As his body began to give in to exhaustion, again his eyes remained on the road. Just in case she came back. Just in case anyone noticed he was missing. Back in town, no one knew. No missing dog report, no alert, no posters. because Buddy wasn't bought or adopted. He had been found on the side of a road weeks before by the woman who had promised to help, but couldn't bring herself to take him to a shelter. He had been her secret, a guilt-ridden secret she couldn't keep anymore. And now, he was a forgotten secret, left to fade away in silence. But the forest had eyes, and not all of them were indifferent. Not far from the path, an old man walked his dog every morning. A grizzled Labrador named Daisy, who had known the forest trails for over a decade. She sniffed everything, pulling her owner toward the tiniest scent of something new. That next morning, she would catch a scent that made her freeze in her tracks. She would stop and tilt her head. Her tail would lower, her body tense. Something was wrong, but for now the puppy slept under a sky of stars, tied to a tree in the middle of a forest that had become his prison. He was waiting, not just for rescue, but for a reason to believe in humans again. He didn't know if anyone would come, but he still hoped. Because that's what dogs do. Even when they're broken, they hope. The morning mist curled gently between the trees like pale fingers, brushing the forest floor and wrapping around every trunk and bush. The air was cold, but not biting, and the earth still held the dampness of the night. Birds were beginning to chirp again, their songs tentative at first, as if testing the quiet of dawn. From the far end of the trail, old boots crunched against gravel and leaves. They belonged to Walter, a man in his late 70s with tired eyes and a face carved with the lines of too many hard winters and not enough laughter. He moved slowly, one hand wrapped around a cane and the other holding a leash that led to Daisy, his faithful Labrador companion. Daisy, a once vibrant black lab now faded to a stormy gray, walked ahead of him with the careful confidence of a dog who knew her path, her job, and her man. Walter had walked this trail every morning for years. It was their quiet routine, their little piece of peace. Daisy would sniff the ground, explore the bushes, maybe chase a squirrel she knew she could never catch. And Walter would talk to her, sometimes about the weather, sometimes about his wife who had passed 3 winters ago, and sometimes about nothing at all. But today was different. Halfway through the trail, Daisy stopped. Her head jerked up, ears perked high, nose twitching rapidly. She sniffed the air, then lowered her snout to the ground and took off toward the trees to their right, veering away from the path. "Daisy," Walter called, startled by her sudden urgency. His voice was rough like gravel, and it caught in his throat with worry. "Where are you going, girl?" She didn't respond. She tugged hard, something she hadn't done in years. She was pulling towards something deep within the woods. Walter, curious and concerned, tightened his grip on the leash and followed as fast as his old legs would allow. Twigs cracked underfoot, leaves crunched, and brambles tugged at his pants. Daisy led him further into the forest, her body low, her tail still, her whole form tense, and then she stopped. Walter followed her gaze. At first he saw nothing, just the shadows of the trees and the clutter of fallen branches and leaves. But then his eyes adjusted and there it was. A puppy. A small, trembling, dirty puppy tied to a tree. Walter's breath caught in his chest. Oh my God. The little creature didn't even bark. He just lifted his head slowly, blinking up at them with sunken, glassy eyes. His tail didn't wag. His body was so still it looked like he'd become part of the forest floor. Walter's heart shattered. He'd seen cruelty before in his lifetime. He'd fought in wars, held dying men in his arms, buried friends, and even his own child. But somehow seeing this tiny animal, abandoned, starved, and left for dead, shook something in him that those other horrors hadn't. "Oh, you poor thing," he whispered, voice cracking. Daisy whimpered softly, nudging forward. She sniffed the puppy carefully, her nose moving around his tiny face and along his frail back. She licked his ear gently, as if to say, "You're not alone anymore." Walter knelt down slowly, his knees creaking in protest. He reached for the rope with trembling hands and began to untie the knot. The cord was embedded in the puppy's neck, leaving a red raw line around his throat. It wasn't just tied. It was cinched tight, like someone hadn't wanted him to escape. Walter had to pull carefully, using his pocket knife to finally cut it loose. As the rope fell away, the puppy flinched, unsure if freedom was safe. He remained, frozen in place. "You're safe now, boy. I've got you." Walter reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a half-eaten granola bar. He unwrapped it slowly and held it out. The puppy hesitated. His nose twitched. Hunger warred with fear. His body was so weak he couldn't even stand properly, his front legs trembling beneath him. But after a few moments, he leaned forward and took a bite from Walter's hand. He chewed slowly, as if even eating hurt. Walter fed him the rest bit by bit, speaking softly the whole time. "That's it. That's a good boy. We're gonna get you warm and clean and fed. No more being alone, I promise you that." Tears welled up in Walter's eyes as he looked at the frail creature before him. How could someone do this? How could they look at something so innocent and decide it didn't matter? "I don't understand people anymore," he said to Daisy, who sat beside him silently, her gaze never leaving the puppy. "But I understand this. I understand this pain." Walter gently scooped the puppy up in his arms. He was so light, barely more than a bundle of bones and fur. The pup whimpered but didn't fight. He laid his head against Walter's chest, and for the first time in what must have been days, he let out a soft sigh, like a child surrendering to safety. As Walter made his way back to the trail, he spoke to the little dog. "We'll get you to the vet. Get you cleaned up. You'll stay with us, okay? Me and Daisy. We've got room for one more." He paused, looking down at the puppy cradled in his arms. "Buddy," he said quietly, trying the name on his tongue. "That suit you?" The puppy stirred slightly. His eyes fluttered. Something in the name reached him, tugging at a thread of memory deep within. "Buddy, yes." It was faint, but he remembered that word, that voice. Walter didn't know who had left. Him didn't know the full story, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that the little dog wasn't alone anymore. They reached the edge of the forest, the morning sun rising above the trees, casting a golden glow over the world. Daisy walked beside them, her steps slow but steady. Walter's grip was firm but gentle, and Buddy, wrapped in his old coat, was safe in his arms. And for the first time since he'd been tied to that cold tree, the little dog closed his eyes. Not from pain or fear, but from something that had almost been lost, peace. The drive back from the vet clinic was quiet, but it wasn't the silence of emptiness. It was the kind of stillness filled with emotion too thick for words. Walter kept glancing at the passenger seat, where the puppy, now officially named Buddy, was curled up in a soft old blanket. The veterinary technician had given it to him after seeing how the puppy clung to Walter's chest like he'd found the last warm place on earth. Daisy, ever the calm guardian, sat in the back seat, her watchful eyes never leaving the back of Walter's head or the pup's shivering body. It was as if she understood that this little soul was now part of their family. And families protect each other. Walter's hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel, not from age, but from the memory of the vet's report. Severe malnourishment, dehydration, rope burns infected, emotionally shut down, likely trauma. The vet had shaken her head slowly. "Honestly, I don't know how long he was out there like that, but he's lucky. If you hadn't found him, he might not have lasted another day." Those words replayed in Walter's mind like a broken record. Another day. What kind of person walks into a forest, ties up a puppy, and walks away? He didn't know the answer. But he knew one thing for sure. That person had no place in Buddy's future. When they pulled into the driveway, Daisy hopped out first, her legs stiff but determined. She waited patiently by the front steps as Walter gathered, the bundle of blanket and fur in his arms again. Buddy didn't move, but his eyes opened, those deep, uncertain eyes that still flinched at every shadow and sound. "It's okay," Walter whispered. stepping up the creaky porch steps. "You're home now." Home. The inside of Walter's house was humble. Wood-paneled walls, worn rugs, and a small fireplace that flickered with orange warmth. Old photo frames lined the mantel, a wedding photo, a boy playing with a golden retriever, a younger Daisy with a toy in her mouth. Love lived in every dusty corner. Walter settled Buddy down on a large pile of towels beside the fireplace, arranging it like a soft nest. He didn't want to bathe him right away. The vet said Buddy needed rest first. So he just sat beside him, offering water from a bowl and bits of boiled chicken in tiny pieces. Buddy took the food reluctantly, chewing slow, as if afraid it might be taken away. Daisy lay close by, curling up protectively. Occasionally, she'd nudge Buddy gently with her nose, licking his ear or resting her chin near his side like she was keeping watch. That silent bond, dog to dog, began forming long before words were needed. As the fire crackled and dusk wrapped its soft blanket over the world outside, Walter just sat in the chair by the fire and watched over them. He didn't turn on the TV, didn't open the newspaper, didn't make a sound. All he did was be there, and that was enough. The next few days were slow, tender, full of quiet victories. On the second morning, Buddy lifted his head when Walter entered the room. On the third day, he wagged his tail, a single thump against the towel nest, when Daisy nosed him hello. On the fourth, he stood, just for a second. But it was a moment that nearly made Walter cry. He started carrying Buddy out to the backyard to let him feel grass beneath his paws. At first, Buddy barely moved. He just stood there, legs wobbling, as if unsure whether the world beyond the tree was safe. But Daisy would trot ahead and then turn back, her tail swaying, waiting. Eventually, Buddy began to follow. A week later, Walter gave him his first gentle bath. The water was warm, the soap mild, and Buddy didn't fight it. He simply leaned into Walter's hands as he rubbed away the layers of dirt and dried blood and sorrow. Underneath all that grime was a beautiful little dog, tan fur with hints of white on his chest, big brown eyes, and ears that flopped sideways like broken angel wings. "You're a handsome boy," Walter said, smiling for the first time in days. "You just forgot for a little while, didn't you?" Buddy blinked at him, and for the first time there was no flinch, no fear in that gaze, just quiet trust. But healing wasn't linear. One night, as the wind howled outside and thunder cracked through the darkness, Buddy panicked. The noise, loud and violent, triggered something deep in his memory. He bolted from the living room, crashing into a chair and scrambling beneath the kitchen table. Walter found him there, curled tight, shivering uncontrollably, eyes wide with terror. "It's okay," Walter murmured, dropping to his knees despite the pain it caused. He reached under the table but didn't pull Buddy out. He simply placed his hand near him, palm open, and waited. Daisy came in slowly and laid beside the table, her presence calm and grounding. After 10 long minutes, Buddy crawled into Walter's lap. He didn't want to be alone, and Walter held him there, rocking slightly as if cradling a scared child. "Whatever happened to you, it's not gonna happen again, I promise you that, little one." A month passed, then 2. Buddy started playing. It began with a ball, an old tennis ball that had once been Daisy's favorite. One morning, Walter found Buddy pawing at it in the yard, unsure what to do. Daisy gave it a nudge and Buddy pounced clumsily. That afternoon, Walter tossed it gently, and to everyone's amazement, Buddy chased it. He didn't bring it back, but he chased it by the third toss. His tail was wagging like a tiny metronome of joy. The neighbors noticed too. Children on their bikes would stop outside the fence and whisper, "That's the puppy Mr. Walter found in the woods." Some of them would kneel by the fence and call, "Hi, Buddy." And though he was still shy, Buddy started wagging at them. Curious, open, hopeful. Walter smiled at the way people seemed to heal through this little dog too. It was as if Buddy's story had reminded everyone that even the most broken souls deserve another chance. That love, given freely, patiently, could thaw even the coldest heart. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees and cast gold across the porch, Buddy jumped up beside Walter's rocking chair. He rested his head on the old man's lap and gave a soft sigh. Walter, eyes misty, scratched behind his ears. "You've come a long way, haven't you?" Buddy looked up at him, and for the first time since that day in the woods, Walter saw no fear in those eyes, only love. Pure, unconditional love. He stroked Buddy's fur gently. "You were tied up, forgotten, thrown away like nothing. But you're everything now. Everything." Daisy watched from the doorway, her tail wagging slow and steady. She knew. They all did. This wasn't just a rescue story, it was a story of return, of redemption, of the kind of love that rebuilds what the world tried to break. Life with Buddy had become its own kind of peaceful rhythm. Slow, healing, warm. Walter, who had once gone through his days with the stillness of someone waiting for time to catch up to him, now found himself moving with purpose. Mornings were filled with walks around the neighborhood, Buddy at his side, his gait still slightly uneven from old injuries, but his spirit light. Daisy trotted ahead or alongside, the reliable protector and gentle friend Buddy never knew he needed until he had her. Buddy no longer flinched at the rustling of trees or the sudden bark of a dog in the distance. He no longer stared into corners with wide, haunted eyes. The scars around his neck had faded, though the fur there never fully grew back. But Walter didn't mind. He called it Buddy's courage collar, a badge of survival, not shame. But healing doesn't mean forgetting. And sometimes the past returns when you least expect it. It started with a knock, a slow, steady rap on the wooden door that made Buddy freeze in place. He was lying by the fireplace when it happened, chewing gently on a plush squirrel toy Walter had bought him. The knock sounded again, louder this time, and Buddy dropped the toy, tail tucked slightly. Walter stood from his chair, wiping his hands on a towel. Daisy rose as well, alert but calm. She always seemed to know the difference between a threat and a visitor. Opening the door, Walter was greeted by a tall man in his 30s, dressed in a tan coat with a clipboard in hand and a badge around his neck. "Mr. Walter Green?" the man asked, his voice professional. "That's me," Walter said cautiously. "Can I help you?" The man gave a small nod. "My name's Officer Langley. I'm with Animal Welfare Services. We received an anonymous tip about a puppy that had been found tied to a tree in Ravenwood Forest a couple months back. Your name came up in the veterinary report." Walter's hands gripped the doorframe. "That's right. I found him. Barely alive. What's this about?" Langley glanced inside, spotting Buddy by the fireplace, ears perked, eyes wary. "That's him, isn't it?" Walter nodded slowly. "His name's Buddy now." The officer sighed. "We believe we may have found the person responsible, or at least someone with information. A neighbor of yours down the road had taken in a litter of puppies a while back, then moved away abruptly. We've been piecing things together. Do you have a few minutes to answer some questions?" Walter's jaw tightened. He looked back at Buddy, now standing, trembling slightly, looking between the stranger and the man who'd saved him. "I'll answer anything," Walter said, "but not here. Let's talk outside. I don't want him scared." On the porch, Walter sat on the steps while Officer Langley reviewed notes on his tablet. "So when you found the puppy, Buddy," Walter corrected softly. "His name's Buddy." "Right, Buddy. He was tied to a tree with a short rope. Malnourished, dehydrated, showing signs of long-term neglect?" "Yes. Vet confirmed it," Walter said firmly. The rope had nearly embedded into his skin. Someone left him out there. Langley nodded grimly. "It matches the timeline we're looking into. The man we're investigating had been breeding puppies without proper licenses. A few neighbors reported him being rough with the dogs. He left town suddenly, but someone came forward recently. Said they saw him driving toward Ravenwood with a box of pups in his truck. Only returned with one." Walter swallowed. "He dumped the rest?" "We don't know," Langley said quietly. "But Buddy might be one of them. Possibly the only one who survived." The silence between them felt heavy, like grief that hadn't fully settled yet. Walter looked toward the horizon, his voice shaking. "He was just a baby." Langley nodded. And because of you, he got a second chance. Inside, Buddy paced in small circles, nose in the air, ears twitching at the sound of unfamiliar voices. Daisy, sensing his unease, walked over and gently nudged his side. It was the same nudge she gave him the first night he came home. The one that meant, "I've got you. You're not alone." Walter returned a while later, face pale but eyes steady. He knelt beside Buddy and whispered, "You're safe. No one's taking you away, I promise." Buddy leaned into his chest, his breathing slowly calming. That night, after dinner and playtime in the yard, Walter sat in his chair with both dogs lying beside him. He couldn't stop thinking about what Langley had said, that Buddy might have been one of several, and that the others weren't found. His heart broke all over again. Not just for Buddy, but for the ones he couldn't save. The nameless, voiceless, forgotten ones. "I wish I'd gotten there sooner," he murmured into the silence. "I wish I could have found them all." Buddy looked up at him, as if understanding. His eyes, once full of fear, now held something else. Quiet strength. Walter reached down and cupped Buddy's face in his hands. "But I got you, and maybe that means something." The next morning, Walter wrote a letter. With the help of his niece, who worked in graphic design, they crafted a flyer with Buddy's photo and the words, "Tied to a tree, left to die. But he survived. If you know anything, speak up." He posted it on community boards, online groups, and left copies at the local shelter. People began reaching out. Strangers, neighbors, even children who had questions. Some wrote letters about their own rescues. Others offered blankets, toys, and food, and slowly the ripples of Buddy's survival spread outward. He became a symbol of endurance, of hope, of what's possible when kindness meets cruelty and says, "Not today." One afternoon, Walter took Buddy and Daisy to a small adoption event hosted by the shelter. Not to adopt, but to speak. The staff had asked Walter to share Buddy's story with families considering rescue pets. Nervous at first, Walter stood with a microphone in his hand, Buddy by his feet, tail wagging shyly. He was thrown away like garbage, Walter told the crowd, his voice thick with emotion. But this dog, this little boy right here, he never gave up. And I won't ever give up on him. A hush fell over the crowd, followed by soft sniffles. People wiped their eyes as Buddy sat tall, looking up at Walter with eyes that glowed in the afternoon light. A child approached after the talk, holding out a drawing. It was a crayon sketch of Buddy and Daisy with hearts around them. "Can I hug him?" she asked. Walter smiled. "If he says it's okay." Buddy stood, walked up to her slowly and gently nuzzled her hand. The girl hugged him, whispering, "You're a hero, Buddy." And in that moment, for the first time, Buddy wagged his tail without hesitation. Buddy's story was no longer just about being tied to a tree. It was about being untied, from pain, from fear, from the lie that he was unlovable. It was about everyone who chose to open their hearts and say, "You matter. You're safe now." Time, as it does, continued its slow, steady march forward. The seasons shifted. The vibrant greens of summer melted into the oranges and golds of fall, and then the quiet hush of winter settled over the town. But inside Walter's home, warmth was a constant, not just from the fireplace that crackled each evening or the cozy blankets thrown over the couch, but from something far deeper, from love, from healing, from the soft, steady breathing of a once-forgotten puppy curled up at Walter's feet, now whole in ways no one ever expected. Buddy, no longer just a name, no longer just a survivor, but a reminder of everything good in the world. It had been nearly a year since Walter had found him tied to that tree in the forest. A full cycle of months filled with healing, quiet victories, and thousands of tiny moments that stitched a broken soul back together. Buddy, once terrified of being touched, now slept pressed up against Walter's side at night, his gentle snores a soundtrack to Walter's peace. He ran through the backyard with Daisy, chasing squirrels he'd never catch, barking at clouds, tail whipping behind him like a banner of triumph. And every morning before the sun fully rose, Buddy would sit at the front door and wait patiently, because Walter had started a tradition. Every week they would visit the spot where Buddy had been left, not because it was pleasant, not because it was easy, but because remembering mattered. That morning was cold, the kind of chill that settled into the bones. Walter bundled up, placing an extra layer on Buddy even though the pup had grown stronger, hardier. It was a padded dog coat with the words "Survivor" stitched across the back, a gift from a kind stranger who had followed Buddy's story online. They walked slowly into the forest, Daisy trotting ahead as always, her nose scanning for familiar scents. Walter held Buddy's leash lightly, not because he needed to restrain him, but because they liked the connection. They were tethered now, but by choice, not chains. When they reached the clearing, the one where Walter had once found the trembling, barely alive bundle of fur and fear, he paused. The rope was gone, of course. He had taken it down the very first day, but he had left something in its place months ago. A small wooden plaque nailed to the tree trunk. It read, "You are not garbage. You are not nothing. You are loved, and you always will be." Underneath it were flowers, candles, even a small, stuffed animal someone had left recently. People had begun visiting the spot after Walter's story spread through the town. Some came to cry. Others came to pray. A few left behind notes, scraps of paper with words like, "I'm sorry," or "You matter." Buddy sat beside Walter, tail curling around his feet. His eyes, once so filled with pain when they first returned here, were calm now. Walter knelt and whispered, "You're safe. You made it." Buddy looked up at him and licked his cheek. On the walk back home, Walter thought about how this dog, this discarded soul, had changed everything. He thought about the nights he used to sit alone in the quiet, grieving not just for the wife he'd lost, but for the life he no longer recognized. He thought about how empty the world had felt until a whimper in the woods had shattered the silence. And in that broken sound, Walter had found his purpose. It was around Christmas when the letter arrived. Official, stamped, from the county courthouse. Walter opened it slowly, his hands trembling slightly. The man who had abandoned Buddy had been found guilty. Cruelty to animals, breeding violations, permanent ban from animal ownership. It wasn't everything. It didn't undo the past. But it was something. Walter looked at Buddy, now sprawled out across the living room rug, chewing a stuffed duck until it squeaked no more. "We did it," Walter said softly. Buddy perked up, ears twitching as if he understood. That weekend, the town held a winter fair. Lights strung across rooftops. Children ran through the snow with mittens and cocoa, and the local shelter had a small booth with dogs available for adoption. Walter hadn't planned to speak, but when the director of the shelter saw him in the crowd, she handed him the microphone, gently. "Please," she said, "just tell them about Buddy." So Walter stepped onto the small wooden stage, Buddy at his side, Daisy lying down nearby, calmly watching the crowd. He took a deep breath. "A year ago, I found this dog tied to a tree in the forest, left there forgotten. He was skin and bones, shaking from cold and fear. The rope around his neck was so tight I couldn't get my fingers beneath it. I didn't think he'd survive." The crowd was still, some hands over mouths, others already wiping their eyes. But he did survive. He didn't give up. And neither did I. Walter paused, his voice catching. "People always ask me, why would someone do something so cruel to a puppy? I don't have an answer, but I do know this. Love can undo what hate has done. Kindness can rewrite a life, and sometimes the ones who were thrown away end up showing us what it means to truly live." A tear slipped down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. "This dog saved me as much as I saved him." When he stepped off the stage, people surrounded him. Children wanted to pet Buddy. Adults asked to volunteer. Donations poured into the shelter like never before. But Walter wasn't interested in attention. He wasn't trying to be a hero. He just wanted the world to know. No dog is disposable. That night, snow fell softly outside the window. Inside, Walter curled up under a quilt on his worn armchair, a book resting on his chest. Daisy lay nearby, her body curled like a comma. And Buddy, sweet, beautiful, brave Buddy, was nestled between Walter's legs, head resting on his knee, breathing slow and even. Walter stroked his ears, then whispered something only Buddy could hear. They left, you to be forgotten, but you became unforgettable. Buddy stirred, and for a moment, Walter swore the dog smiled. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and comment below. Tell us where you're watching from, and help us spread love for dogs everywhere. Type the name of your city, and show Buddy he's not forgotten. Every like brings more awareness, every share gives hope, and every comment reminds the world that every dog deserves love.